I think I'm a special one.
We've been waiting to get to them. They are the favoured duo at Chelsea Football Club currently, who seemingly will never face any repercussions. They are, of course, Paul Winstanley and Laurence Stewart. And I guess technically you can add Joe Shields because obviously he has some involvement in transfer. So I guess, but these are the leading two. These are the public face of the sporting directors, and that is Winstanley and Stewart. And the question we've got is, what is the vision behind Chelsea's current sporting directors? How well they're executing it? I think that'll be a pretty short answer. Have recent results changed perceptions of their approach? So this is I think to a lot of people, Joe, I think this is the big one. Like, even maybe it shouldn't be, because I think what we've just spoken about with Clearlake is it's Thanos, right? If we're doing an MCU thing, Thanos is Clearlake, right? Maybe this is more of a mid-tier MCU villain, but I think to a lot of people, they look at the sporting directors as the biggest problem at Chelsea right now.
Yeah, no, I like the framing there. I think when you look at the main gripe that fans have, and I think it is, again, it's always going to be that figure. It's the level of spend and what we have to show for it. 1.5 billion spent in 2-3 years in terms of the amount of outlay. Yes, people always try to discount the Bowley initial window and all this sort of stuff here, etc., etc. The strategy and the execution and the overall philosophy and direction of recruitment has been led by the Winstanley and Stewart kind of cohort for a very long period of time. As you mentioned, Joe Shields is often involved. We seem to have an obsession with anybody who's ever sort of been in Manchester, let alone that has played for Man City. So, I mean, that clearly is... Joe didn't give back his corporate iPhone at the end of his Man City reign for obviously obvious reasons there. But if we start with the two main guys here now, their work pre-Chelsea, they had never been at that sort of level of influence, because a director of football, it isn't just about scouting players. It's about the negotiation side of it as well. It's about the business of football. You have to have a level of intelligence, a level of personable characteristics, and a way about you that enables you to negotiate with very, very powerful and senior figures in other football clubs. So it's not just about talent spotting. There is a rounded profile here. And I think as much as there was a lot of fanfare around Marina Granovskaya when she was here, the perception of her in football was that she was a phenomenal negotiator. She was phenomenal at that side of the job, and probably she just needed somebody to come in and actually do the talent spotting better than Scott McLaughlin was at the time, in terms of sort of just giving her a better kind of range of people to go for. So whereas she, I think, probably, she won the Football Executive of the Year award numerous times. She was revered in football. Like, she had that power and influence that you would want somebody to wield at Chelsea. I think the first thing to say is that neither of these guys have that in their locker in terms of positions they've held or worked at clubs of that particular stature. So we've elevated them to a position that I don't think either of them are particularly skilled at. And there are numerous kind of examples here that I can refer to. So anecdotally speaking, with agents of players that we've met with, just their ability to sell the club is virtually non-existent. You're hoping that the name Chelsea is going to have the same effect that it had 10, 15 years ago in terms of just coming to the club. We've missed out on a fair few players in terms of our ability to not sell the club, the direction, also just not offer the wages that these guys are looking for. I think they quite happy to say, sort of the Michael Elise situation, we were quite honestly ahead of the curve with most people in terms of that sale. But the longer we were speaking to him, the less likely it was he was going to sign. And I think that Bayern literally got a deal done in like an afternoon, phoned it up, yep, cool, you're worth this money, cool, we'll pay this. And that was the end of the Elise to sort of Bayern saga. And then Chelsea kind of went in a different direction there. So from that standpoint, I have absolutely no idea why they have been elevated to the status of being able to conduct negotiations to do this level of work at Chelsea, because they've never done it before, at least to my knowledge, and certainly not to the level and degree of which Chelsea have historically had that. When Roman Abramovich joined Chelsea and knew nothing about football apart from the fact he liked it, he went out and got Peter Kenyon, who was by far at that time one of the most prominent and well-known and well-respected executives in world football. He went out and got Pete de Visser in, who is still to this day one of the most legendary football scouts. That the amount of unbelievable talent that this guy discovered is ridiculous in terms of even trying to put out like a squad of players that he discovered. He went out and got somebody that knew about football, and then obviously went out and hired the best coach in world football at that period of time in Jose Mourinho. Like, he went out and sought excellence from the best places that he could possibly find them. we've come in and hired the guy from the guy from Brighton. And the guy from Monaco. So there's a slightly different positioning of the two people we've come and sort of brought in here. Now, if you actually look at our recruitment strategy, I think it is almost exactly equivalent to Brighton. But again, you've got to start looking at what is the intention for Brighton in terms of their model. Their model is to hopefully land on a Caicedo or a player for relatively like pittance and then sell them for an absolute fortune. Like that is the entire business model that they have kind of, promulgated, that they have kind of set on, and that is what works for them. That business model is not conducive to winning Premier League titles. Like we are not looking to sign players for 20 million quid and then sell them to Real Madrid for 100 million quid. Like I'm hoping that we spend 100 million quid on a player and that 100 million player lets us win, the Premier League. Or, if we do find a rare talent or emerging talent, that's absolutely wonderful. But we are meant to be the club at the top of the food chain, and we are operating like a club who is in the middle of the food chain in terms of as a stepping stone here. So I think he has perfectly imported that mentality from Brighton in terms of the signings. Now, I did a bit of a deep dive on Winstanley because I think he's a personal subject of ire for me for many reasons. But, we're looking at like 51 signings he made at Brighton. Maybe you could say 11 of them were absolute, complete and utter successes. And I'm including people like Pascal Gross in that assessment. So I'm not even talking about absolute superstars. I'm talking about from a Brighton perspective, 11 were absolute huge successes. So, like a 1 in 5 ratio in terms of success there. And if we're looking at his ability to maybe spot like a Champions League caliber talent, that for me drops to about 5 players that they signed. So 10% of everyone that they signed. Caicedo, Cucurella, McAllister, Mitoma. There's one, probably one more that I'm missing in terms of that group of players. But there was 5 when I had a look that I felt probably could play for like a top 4, 5, 6, Premier League team, be a contributor, regularly play for them, etc., etc. So if that is the style of scouting, or if this is the level that he is used to scouting, what is to say that when he comes to Chelsea, because we've been down this route before, but when we did it before, looking at younger players. We brought in Eden Hazard. We brought in an Oscar. We brought in Juan Mata. Like we brought in, Kevin De Bruyne, Mohamed Salah. We brought in Lukaku. We brought in Thibaut Courtois. Like these are, the absolute upper tier talents of their age group comparatively. So when we've kind of gone down the, under 23 route, or whatever we're going to say historically, the caliber of player that we bought then is night and day to really what we've bought so far in terms of sort of the players. And you can say, some of them just haven't panned out as you would have intended, etc., etc. But again, I will always go back to the point of £1.5 billion the club have spent on players, and we have huge gaps at there isn't a single part of this team that works. That is almost more difficult to achieve than just randomly asking a group of 10 people on Twitter, how should we spend £1.5 billion on players, and probably getting to a slightly better position. And that's the concerning thing for me, is whatever way I've sliced and diced, is even looking at, Stewart at Monaco, it's not a wonderful body of work that you think is going to carry through. And even more so now, I was looking at an old favourite of mine, Luis Campos, who has done absolute wonders at PSG in terms of rebuilding them. Now, this is a guy who has a track record, and of course, like you're never going to be unbelievably successful every single place you go for a variety of reasons. But you look at sort of their average age is a touch over ours. The amount of players he's brought back to PSG, in terms of the profile, in terms of getting it right for the French league, in terms of the age, in terms of the markets he's buying from. Like he is bought in like horses that are ready to go. Like we are looking again at sort of bringing in little ponies and hoping that they eventually turn into like Grand National winning stallions. It's a markedly different approach where we have gone for lots and lots and lots of lottery tickets. And even the players that have been slam dunks, like Cole Palmer, for example, had Nkunku not been injured, and had somebody at City not got in touch with Joe Shields and been like, oh, by the way, like Pep doesn't really fancy Palmer this season, like you might want to have a go at him. Like that was complete and utter luck that ended up in our laps. And so even the things that have panned out super, super well, and then even then, I look at the midfield players we've sport, the £200 million players to me, they don't complement one another. And it's a tricky situation to be in where both have wonderful individual skill sets, both have very, very contrasting skill sets as well. But as a pairing, And I've asked this to many people here, like, you can't give me 5 games that they've absolutely dominated. And then even if I then elevate the question to, give me a handful of games against really good teams, the Liverpools of this world, Arsenal, City, etc., where they've bossed the game, it's very, very difficult to look at that. So even when we've spent big money and tried to rebuild by addition of players, and even Lavia, you can kind of throw him in as well. It's like 270 million quid on 3 players. One of them barely plays, and the other 2 can't play together particularly well, and particularly when it counts over the course of a season. So even when we do spend big and we maybe get an individual in who has got talent, we're kind of unable to really sort of allow them to flourish because the players we're surrounding them with or pairing them with or whatever, we're not buying in the right way. So talent identification has been a big issue of mine. This Estevao that we've signed, like, wonderful, fantastic. But can you imagine dropping him into this team next season if Maresca is still here and asking him to basically pick the ball up on the halfway line?
That is the, yeah. I mean, that's the thing, like, with Estevao. Like, I have raised caution with him basically since we signed him. And people don't like it because they think I'm talking down the player. And I'm like, no, like, it's more of a Chelsea fear than a Estevao fear. It's this guy is not. You've got to factor in how ridiculously young he is. It's not just moving from France to England. It's moving from a completely different culture and part of the world, a language barrier, a culture barrier. Like, he is going to have to, as a human being. Like, I remember me and Jay had this conversation about a year ago. I said, think about in your life when you were 16, 17 years old, and think about how much you changed as a human being from the age of 16, 17 to 21. And you're doing it under the spotlight and the pressure, because a lot of people have and it's similar to Andre Santos, but especially with Estevao, people have built this guy up to be like a savior figure. And the enormous, maybe he is another Vinicius Jr. Like, and listen, as I think you expressed, as whenever we're talking about concerns about Chelsea, we all hope they're wrong. We all pray they're wrong. I hope Estevao comes in and is the next Eden Hazard and turns out to be an outstanding player for Chelsea. And all of those fears off the pitch don't come true. But I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I fear that those things could impact him, because it's not just a case of plug and play for some of these players. There needs to be a good environment for them to walk into. Like, you think back to Chelsea history, like we're talking about some of our great players. Some of them were world beaters, but I think some of them also obviously were benefited off of being in an environment that was elite, that being in an environment where they learnt off older and better players, and that's how they got. I think it's revealing listening to Ginobili Mikel recently and he speaks about the dressing room that he was in. And not that Ginobili Mikel couldn't have had a good career, but you wonder if he'd ever reach the same level if he didn't learn from the players around him, if he didn't walk into that Chelsea dressing room at quite a young age and sit in dressing rooms with the likes of Frank Lampard, with the likes of Michael Essien, be around leaders like JT and Didier and, Petr Cech, and learn off coaches like Jose Mourinho. The career isn't just because, other than Lionel Messi, the career isn't just because of one player. It's because of, and one individual. It's because of a system around them that hopefully elevates them to their potential. And I think that Estevao is going to be a very revealing moment, I think, for this ownership in a lot of ways, because I think they're banking on him, Kendry Paez and Andre Santos to kind of be a trio that proves that this kind of buy cheap, sell high, or buy cheap and they come in and be great players, it kind of works. Because if that one doesn't work, I think they're going to be in real bother. But sorry to interrupt, because I just think that Estevao in a lot of ways is quite a revealing. Listen, we don't know how he's going to turn out at Chelsea. We'll find out. But I think the concerns are very genuine and very valid from a lot of people.
I think just around at that point on Estevao here, I mean, Vinicius Jr. is a great comparison. I mean, I think people forget with him, there was a time at Real Madrid where Benzema literally was in the tunnel saying, he's so bad, I think he's playing against us. And, for him to actually say that, like, don't pass him the ball, I think he's playing against us. Like, it took Vinicius Jr. 3, maybe 4 years to become the player that we're seeing at the moment. And he, again, when you're talking about talent, coming over from Brazil, in an elite environment, took him years to get up to the position he is now. And as you say, the pressure that Chelsea fans are putting on Estevao to come in and immediately be this superstar, phenomenon kind of level of player when it rarely happens for Brazilian teenagers is very interesting. And the other thing is, when I've asked this to a few people here, I had a look at someone recently, and somebody's first kind of season as a professional, similar sort of age profile coming through, like 25 games, 8 goals. Like, would that be, given where fans are positioning Estevao, is that a stat line you think the majority of people would be happy with across all comps?
Probably not. People would be expecting like him to light up like Cole Palmer did.
And the point being that stat line is Lionel Messi. So if Lionel Messi at Barcelona, 8 goals really in his first kind of like 25 games, like his first sort of push into the Barcelona team, only scored eight goals. Like the expectation on Estevao to come in and, as you say, and be like a 20 goal a season, 20 assist guy, like the double guy, is insane. Like if he does come in and he is of that level, like that's absolutely incredible. Like to have a player come in and potentially be that level of player for that period of time. But there is a cautious element in that you can't name a Brazilian teenager who has come across and been, a top 3-4 player in their position immediately off the bat. Probably the best example is Gabi Jesus at City, who was always just an understudy and obviously now is at Arsenal. But I can't recall of a teenager coming across and being an immediate success in the Premier League. So historically, things are against him. From a modern standpoint, if we're using Vinicius Junior as some sort of benchmarking kind of proxy, 2-3 years for him to kind of adjust to Europe and be the player that we've seen today in a team that had infinite more talent than what this Chelsea team has, and a lot more structure and leadership. And then if we even look at sort of the early part of Messi's career, which is going to be, as I say, 25 games, at Barcelona, 8 goals, those are okay numbers, but they're not Messi kind of goat standard. Even he had a little bit of a period of adaptation at the early point of his career to professional football, to men's football. So, you're quite right to point out that there is not an attempt to diminish the talent or diminish the potential or whatever it's going to be. It's just to make people not be essentially on his case from day one to be this kind of, ethereal, world-class, upper echelon superstar from minute one when he starts kicking a ball in a blue shirt. Because it already feels like, the pressure is on him to be the saviour of the entire football club. And to put that on any player is ridiculous. To put it on someone who, A, hasn't ever kicked a ball here, B, might not speak English, and C, is a child, is frankly insane. But we're kind of at that point. And it probably, again, bringing it back to the whole kind of Beluco, director of football situation, the fact that so many people are pinning the future of the club on a kid who hasn't even, moved into the country yet is a ridiculous indictment of how badly the club have spent money.
No, I completely agree. Just before we move on, because the final two things, we'll speak about Maresca and then we'll speak about sort of the fan side of it and expectation. Why do you think there is they're seemingly, based on, reporting from the likes of Matt Law and others, that Winstanley and Stewart seem to face absolutely no accountability for anything? That is one of the most baffling parts of all of this. Because you just lay it out, and you don't even have to add the transfers. The transfers themselves are bad enough to indict their failures, and we've just done it here. The coaching situation as well. They've gone from, they were very integral in the sacking of Graham Potter, which cost the club a lot. Then you bring in Mauricio Pochettino. That lasts only about 9 months, and obviously there were talks about how that falling out happened and whether Pochettino was really sacked. He left by mutual consent, and what was it, like a 15-16 page review they gave about why Pochettino should be sacked. And obviously he then leaves in a chaotic fashion after a good end to the season, and then you bring in a guy on this ridiculously long contract who has basically done nothing to justify him getting a role at a club like Chelsea. So if Maresca fails, surely they have failed and surely they should leave. But all of the noises, and you've got to take them seriously, are that no, there will be no accountability, there will be no repercussion, which I'm still struggling to find the answer for why they face no repercussions for any of their failings. So
this is something that I struggle with, and I have spoken to a very good friend of mine and has an interesting podcast that he delves into every now and then, Keir. So Stratford Bridge, Keir Doyle, I think his Twitter handle is, football coach, but a very, very big data guy. And his kind of reasoning, I think actually it makes sense from the perspective of, again, if you're looking at how the club is trying to position itself. Now, the simple statistic that a lot of clubs look for in sort of that advanced metrics, all of the expected metrics and all this kind of stuff that clubs dig into now, you've got the expected sort of goal difference per 90 is kind of sort of the measurement of success here. Now, despite how poorly we've looked for probably close to, I guess, nearly 2 months now in terms of football in the Premier League after 25 games, that kind of XG, kind of for and XG against kind of differential that we're looking at on a per 90 basis puts us fourth in the league. So I would imagine, and this is me making the argument on behalf of if I was the sporting directors here, that if things had panned out as intended, the expected metrics, the underlyings are saying that we are comfortably the fourth best team in the league at the moment. Now, you and I might look at that and think that is absolutely ridiculous to sort of suggest that we are comfortably the fourth best team in the league. But that, I think, is kind of how they are eluding and escaping any sort of criticism from or pressure from those above them. So that's the first point, is I think they are relying on a lot of the advanced metrics and a lot of the advanced narrative to say, well, if we'd have had a bit more luck or blah, blah, whatever ridiculous excuses they want to throw, the XG, kind of goal or the expected goal difference per 90 puts them at fourth. So you've got Liverpool still top, Arsenal in second, interestingly enough, Bournemouth a third, and then Chelsea are fourth on those particular metrics for the time being. That's probably the first point that I would imagine they're making. The second, and this will probably factor into the last question in terms of fans' expectations, so I'll tackle a little bit of that now. I think, and the more that this kind of transpires, the longer that they are there, I think that this is more true with each passing month. I think they are executing what Badad Iqbali and co are asking for perfectly. Buy me loads and loads of players that we can potentially flip for a bit of profit. The player trading model is what we've asked you to do here. Get us into a position where we are the fourth best team in the league, which, again, going back to point one about the expected underlying metrics, they will point and say, we've built a team that is the fourth best team in the Premier League, and the expected metrics say so. It's just luck or whatever reason that we currently aren't there, for example. I think they are perfectly executing those instructions. And again, referencing all the way back to some of the early stuff we were talking about, Daniel, the provision that with the minimum amount of effort and spend and upheaval in terms of the team here, they will again point to, we didn't need a second striker for Jackson, we didn't need another midfielder, we didn't need a centre back, we don't need a goalkeeper, we are where we are meant to be based on the underlying metrics here. So it comes down to, I think, again, a fundamental mismatch of what Chelsea fans are looking at on a week-to-week basis, our expectations for the club and where we think the club should be heading, versus what the actual objectives are for the two directors. And if that is build a team that is going to be good enough to finish 4th or 5th, at the moment, regardless of spend, regardless of all the points I made about the spine, regardless of all the changes that I would personally make or transfers I would have made, etc., they will point to the numbers, and a little bit like the bus driver in The Simpsons who keeps tapping on the sign, will keep tapping on the metrics, saying the metrics say we should be 4th, based on, and I think, unfortunately, for many of us, even if we are, losing matches, if we are playing poorly, if it is just this kind of horrible drudgery and potential, kind of slip and slide to where we're going to end up, I think as long as they are tapping the sign, then they are not going to be under pressure. So, it's not necessarily an agreement that I'm happy with. I work in data. I know in terms of analytics how they can be used to paint particular messages. I sell business and work based on particular messaging around data. It is a start. It is an art. The storytelling is an art. So I get sort of the angle that they're coming from. I think that the concerning part will be is that, yeah, they're tapping the sign at the moment. We still have 13 games to go. And the current position, no Nicholas Jackson, the form of our best players, the fact that we're going to have to ride Caicedo and Enzo until the absolute death, there is no way that those guys can miss a minute of football at the moment. All of the signs and all of the kind of momentum is suggesting that there is a huge amount of regression ahead of us. Now, you go back to Pochettino's final 15 games, we saw the uptick. I think we actually won our last 5 league games. There was a huge huge uptick in form that sort of rescued a bit the sort of the second half of that campaign. Are we now going to see the reverse of that, where we started pretty well, maybe we've overperformed slightly, maybe we've hit a little bit of a period of regression, and now are we starting to see sort of the true reflection of the squad that these guys have built? Cole Palmer isn't rescuing us every single game now in terms of, just getting that goal or that assist that maybe he might have done at different points in his career. We don't seem to have goals anywhere else in the team. Nkunku, Neto, Madueke again is injured and is out. Caicedo and Enzo aren't suddenly going to develop even like a Michael Ballack level of output, like 8 to 10 goals a season. That I imagine is not suddenly just going to rush into the team. Our fullbacks aren't all of a sudden going to turn into Roberto Carlos or Marcos Alonso or pick any whatever it's going to be. And we don't seem to score a ton of goals from set pieces. So it isn't promising in terms of the projections of where we're heading, and certainly the numbers are starting to turn, and they have been turning for the past few games. But when we're looking at that angle of pressure, I would imagine, again, we are doing Simpsons meme, tap the sign over and over and over again to Badad. And he's like, okay, fair enough. And he absolutely must be somebody that buys that sort of methodology and that kind of presentation of the situation. Now, if this turns and we end up wherever we're going to end up in real terms, in actual terms, come the end of the season, I'm assuming that those kind of underlying numbers will probably trend in the wrong direction. Then the tapping the sign becomes a little bit of a different question. But trying to sort of make sense of it for the time being, that is my argument on their behalf. I don't like it. I'm not a huge fan of it. I would much prefer to sort of look at the trends and try to analyse in a footballing sense where things are progressing, or in our case, regressing. But I can't imagine that is something, obviously, that they're not going to be doing that because it will put their jobs at detriment. So tapping the sign, we are meant to be fourth based on this particular metric. That's what it says on a very, very basic level. The fact we're not there is because of X, Y, Z reasons, and they will hope to God that they remain relatively around that level, fourth and fifth, for the remainder of the season, so they can continue tapping that sign when people talk about the work they've done. We can all talk about the £1.5 billion spent and that we should be so much closer. And for context here, Liverpool's expected goal difference is plus 32.7. Arsenal's is plus 17.4. So they are miles behind Liverpool in an XG perspective. We are at 13.5. So they are almost 2.5 times as good as us. So when we're looking at these numbers, I think others, I'm looking at how close we are to Liverpool. I'm not looking at how close we are to finishing fourth or fifth. My benchmark for Chelsea has always been, and you can go back and look at the points I've made about Chelsea finishing 20 points off the title for X number of years. It's something I make all the time in terms of podcasting. I am always looking at the top of the table. So the fact that we are so ridiculously far behind Liverpool, even in the metric that I guess that they're relying on, suggests that we have an awful lot of work to do. And particularly, again, we will always go back to that point. The amount of money we have invested and spent as a football club, we should not be so far behind a team like Liverpool, who really, they've lost their kind of spiritual leader in Jurgen Klopp. They've got a new manager in. They've barely made any investment, and yet they are above and away the best team in the league this season by an absolute mile. We should be so much closer to them than we are, and that shouldn't be a position of entitlement or something that fans can't say or unappreciative of. We have spent the kind of money where we should be close to them, and we are not anywhere near them in any way possible. If you're looking at points, we're not near them. If you're looking at any of the underlying metrics, we're nowhere near them either.